Hello again. And today we are live with our member Neo1186. Did I remember the number correctly?
It's correct, yeah.
And Neo is our member from Germany. Could you tell us a bit what kind of games do you play and how long have you played poker?
I played poker for about 5 months, and I would say seriously for about 3 months. I mostly play sit and goes, 9 max, turbo.
And today we are going to take a look on some 9max turbos. So I have here 164 sit and goes from Neo. And we can see that Neo has won a nice amount during these times, but we're going to see what there are still to improve. And I think there are some questions, so if you have any questions, please just try to get into some point in the middle of my explanations, so okay. I can try to explain some things better. But usually, because this is a public-private coaching, we are going to do it a bit different way. So I'm going to start by explaining why we are looking at certain things first. So usually when I'm having an amount of hands from a player that I don't know how he plays beforehand, I'll take a look on his statistics on how he plays different situations. And usually I'm doing it by looking for a sit and go that has been won or just gone far. And we can take like any sit and go here. And after this, we'll just replay all these hands. And we can look at the stats that open up. And you can see my HUD stats here. And what I can see instantly from Neo's statistics, that his game plan is pretty solid. And he's a bit on a tighter side. But for example, if we are looking at this table right now, that here's like Belinda, that's going to be really wide, Vakuru, that's really wide, Klenovic, Kyprius, Lady Starsoul and Harald. Like, you'll make money if you are playing tight when all the opponents are playing really loose. And they are going to increase your equity by a lot by just doing stupid things and colliding early in a sit and go. So playing it tight in the micros, it's not a mistake, but there will be situations that you'll want to open up a bit more. And instantly I'll see that what we are probably going to look at. So we can see here all of those steal statistics. And steal from cutoff, so it means that when you have gotten when the action has been folded to you and you have an option to open the pot from cutoff and try to steal the pot, you are doing it only 13% of the time. So when I'm seeing that you are raising about 8% of your hands and you are raising about 13% of unopened hands in cutoff, I think that you'll probably play a pretty static range from under the gun to cutoff, and that's something that we can improve because playing position is something that will make you money. Mm-hmm. And also button play is something that we are going to take a look on, because 24% I think profitably you can play a lot more, but I think on the small blind I like that you are really aggressive. And my hands are always filtered. This is filtered from 9-handed to 7-handed. So this was just the early game. That usually it's going to be pre-ante games early on, and then we'll just try to find out the game that there's only 4 to 6 players or 5 to 6 players remaining. And it was easy. And what I want to see here, when we are going from 7 to 9-handed to 5 to 6-handed game, I want to see the VPIP and PFR increase, so I want to see the player to open up their game. and that's something that you are doing well. And still I'm looking that now I can see that your cutoff steal statistic, it's exactly the same as the PFR. And PFR does include also hands that are getting limped to you or raised to you. So I think that 19% of cutoff steals is going to be something that can be improved a lot. And
Okay.
as Kauris said, that wow, Germany, and congrats for the Football World Cup.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll carry on, and here we can see also that I like the small blind steals, but I think from button and cutoff we can definitely steal some more. And now we can also see that if I'm moving that in here when we are about 5 to 6 players remaining, I think our average stack size is going to be somewhere between 10 to 20 big blinds. So we are going to see some of the push fold strategy also in this part, and on the next part 3 to 4 handed it's almost always going to be pretty short stacked. So next we're trying to find a 3 to 4 handed hand. Let's see here, aces are always nice. But that's not 3 to 4 handed. This is 3 to 4 handed, and what I want to see here is again an increase in activity. So you are still opening up your game as there is going to be less people playing, and that's good. But now the cutoff steals and button steals, they are even going down. And I think this is going to be something that's going to be crucial. Like this button and cutoff steals when there are 3 to 4 people remaining, I think that there is going to be a lot of money that can be earned in these situations. And Marcus, why these are $1.5 games, so every game in this session is going to be $1.50 game. So in here, that's something that I want to be looking at pretty immediately. And that's what we are going to do with Hold'em resources during the first hour of our discussions. And lastly, I want to see the heads up. And usually heads up I can just take the last hand and we can see the heads up statistics. And what I want to see on heads up, I want to see aggressive play. And I want to see player that doesn't fold too much to an opponent's aggressive play. And in here I can see that you have been opening your small blind 75% of the time, and that's going to be decent, but there will be situations that it would be even better to open even more. There have been, I think I looked at one heads up true that you played that your opponent did first time play back at you from the big blind. He folded like 10 big blinds in a row, and only the 11th big blind he played back, but you folded something like 2 to 3 small blinds during the game. And also I like that you are not folding too much against the people, and you shouldn't be calling too wide, but you should be, at least on the aggressive opponent, you should be calling. And yeah, Kaleon, these are 9 max sit and goes, single table tournaments. So I'll have to say that we are not going to look at heads up, because if I'm thinking about the $1.50 sit and goes, I'm thinking that your heads up game is going to be it's going to be really good for the level. So you'll get cookie points for heads up. And how we are going to go through this a bit more. I looked one of your tournament through, and we could look at some marked hands, but I rather like that we are going to do a bit of a different approach. that we are then going to look at some unopened hands, and we could, if you are having a mix of different games, you can select here, like you can flag the correct flag on the games, like if you want to have just 50-50s. But here we don't need to do anything for our session, because we are only having one type of tournaments in our. So first I have made a quick filter on unopened pots, and I'll add something more because we are interested in the hands that you have folded but you should have been playing, because I think there is going to be a lot of hands that are short stacked and they are coming to you unopened, but you haven't played those. So that's what we are going to focus on.
Okay.
And pre-flop, we are going for the pre-flop folds, and we are going to look at the folded as first action. It's also going to be the unopened hands, so I don't know, perhaps folded as first action would also suffice. But we are saving and applying filters, and we'll see that if we are getting a nice amount of hands. And we got 3,700 hands, and I'm going to select them all for export. So I'm selecting the top one, then I'm pressing my shift key, and I'm pressing the last one, and then on them I'll mouse over them, and then I'll click on the right button and export hand histories, and this will make sure that we are having a nice amount of hands to go through with Hold'em resources. And actually I have cheated a bit because I have my unopened folded session here already, but let's do it because it doesn't take that much time. And we don't need the summaries, but we'll take them anyway. So next, what we are going to do, we are going to open Hold'em resources calculator. And what we want to do with Hold'em resources calculator is that we want to have a really effective filter to see which hands should we concentrate on. And we are loading from hand history files. We are going to select the file, and that's going to be the unopened folded. And OK, and finish, and we'll see.
Okay.
And now we got the 164 tournaments, and we are selecting the top one and scrolling all the way to the bottom, shift key on, and we are going to right click and quick analyze. With quick analyze, I like to look at max effective BBs as 20 and not use the restrictive all-in filter. I have found out that it doesn't increase the time that much. And sometimes when you don't have the restrictive all-in filter, you'll get to see some hands that are going to be mistakes that are bubbling up. It's going to be a bit problematic that there will be hands that aren't mistakes that are going to be bubbling up because the restrictive all-in filter is not used, but we'll want to use this quick analyze as a filter for our hands. When we press OK, then it starts to analyzing our hands, and my computer is probably 5 years old soon, and I'm now sending one video stream to only Neo without any delay, one video stream for all of you, and you can see how quickly we have already seen about 2,000 hands. And now we could also ask that how closely did you follow the World Cup of football that Germany won?
Well, I'm not that big of a football fan, but my parents are big fans, so I kind of had to watch it.
But now we are complete with our import, and it's going to be the same import as the import 2. And now I'm going to want to look at the hands, and we are going to look at the hands that are having the having the worst EV difference that the quick analyze finds. And there's a question from our admin Deja that Neo1186, how much do you play normally, weekly or monthly?
Last month I played way too much. I 12 tabled and I played, I think, 5,000 tournaments.
5,000 turbo sit and goes.
Yeah. It was way too much.
That's huge volume, and I think that Caleon that is trying to aim for Supernova Elite this year, he's playing from $30 to $200, and he's playing around those numbers. So that's really huge volume to play.
Yeah. And this month I got down to just 4 to 6 tabling and playing way less and concentrating more on learning. So I think I play maybe 40 a day. 20 to 40.
I think it's really good to first focus on getting a really good winning strategy in place. And afterwards, it's easier to increase the volume when you have the good winning strategy in place. I think there are really a lot of players that are starting to put in really big volume before they understand the complete game, and then they are not improving the optimal way. So that's, I think it's really good that you have now taken less tables and trying to focus on improvement. And now we can see that from these 3,000 hands, we are getting quite a few of hands that Hold'em Resources is thinking that is going to be a mistake to fold. And we'll see that there are going to be some teams that are going to be reoccurring. And first team is going to be these kind of hands, like this is the hand that Hold'em Resources thinks that you have lost the most value in. So this is a bubble spot, and we can see if we are looking at this where there is the most EV diff, we can see that it's four-way, 6-way, 5-way, 4-way, 5-way. So that's something that we are going to focus on the bubble and near the bubble. And this 8-5 off, this is, I think it's an interesting hand that we can see that we are having a huge chip lead. And there's a player with just 1.2 BBs that has folded before us. What do you think about this situation in general?
I'm the chip leader. People against me have a very big bubble factor, and I think I can push pretty loose.
Yeah, and we can see from this top right what we can push, and it says that we can push pretty much any two cards. And this is one of those situations that our opponents will require at least a pocket pair to call us, even if they know that we are going to push any two cards. And I think this is a great situation in other ways as well. And in Hold'em Resources we can always open a hand for looking at it better than quick analyze by right-clicking the hand, then we can open the hand as basic and it fills the stack sizes correctly instantly, and that's pretty cool. So when we are looking at this hand, a hand with more analysis tools, we can see that the first caller can call us with 10s plus and the other guy can call us with jacks plus. And I think this is a situation that you are going, in the micros you are going to get called too wide. But I think this is going to be a solid situation that even if they are calling way too wide, that they are losing a lot of money by their calls. So I'm saying that they are calling somewhere to 5 to 6%. I'm still thinking that it's going to be way plus EV still to shove any two. And I think it's somewhere around they would need to be calling somewhere around 10 to 15% here.
Mhm.
So this is a spot that if you are not pushing any two here, even in the micros, and you are thinking that your opponents are calling too loose, I think you are going to be losing value. And I don't know, it's probably really far that this becomes not of a good push. Like 20% range on the opponent that should be calling less than 2% is not going to be cutting it, so the opponent could be playing with 10 times as wide of a range than they should be, and it's still profitable to push 8-5 off.
Okay.
And there's also, this is practically the same kind of situation that we can see that we are a clear chip lead, and this time we are also having a really solid hand, that we are having Jack 9 off, so and this is also a situation that we can see that if everybody plays correctly, we can shove any two cards, and Jack 9 off is going to be a top 35% hand. So, so I think these are going to be big mistakes, and they're going to be mistakes that, as I said to you before, that if you are using the Hold'em resources is 2 weeks trial, and you are utilizing it effectively and using the quick analyze, this is probably the best time that you can improve your late game and your push fold game, and you can get the worst mistakes out of your game pretty easily. So this is why I wanted to take the Hold'em resources first, because we are also seeing some pretty interesting hands, and this is also one of those. And this is not an any two spot, and this is six-handed. And what do you think about this kind of situation when there are two 5 big blind stacks behind you?
I think a call is likely, and I think that high card hands like Ace X, King X, they gain value, and low suited connectors lose value. So I think I should push here, but with a high card.
Yeah, and that's something that I think that this is going to also be one of those big mistakes, because I have seen you fold in these similar situations solid aces, like ace 5, ace 4 suited, ace 3 suited, that could be pushed. And these are the things that we could see that we would need to get these situations to bubble up from the mass of hands. When we saw that from 3 to 4 handed you were playing only 20% from the button, and these are the spots that you can improve on. And if we are looking at this hand, that there are 2 players behind us, and they should be calling 26 and 45% of the time. And your range is still going to be practically any king, any ace, and any suited queen, any pair. And I think that this is, in the micros, this is not enough, because in general, people that need to call wide, this is just a basic strategy that people that need to call wide, usually the players aren't calling wide enough. So I would be shoving more than this. I would be presuming that this big blind still doesn't call enough, but he will call the prettiest hands. And if we are looking at prettiest hands and then we are getting our best response, we could be shoving pretty much any suited card here. And ace 5 off is going to be, it's going to be huge, because this is now about 0.9 of a prize pool. And when there are 9 players in a table, this is about 0.9% of a 900% prize pool. So like there is 9 players in the sit and go that have contributed to the prize pool. So this is about, if we are thinking about ROIs, if you are shoving this ace-5 off, on average you are going to be gaining about 8% of ROI in that one game, and that's something that I don't think that you should be missing. And this is going to be pretty close, and this is actually interesting because this combines the two what we have discussed. Like in here we can see with the ace deuce off, and there is, like, we talked about bubble abuse, and then we talked about the ace hands, and we can see that our opponents are, the big blind is only 11 big blinds deep. So I think this is something that you'll need to push. And I don't think that you need to push 100% because there are players that are going to be calling you too wide. But not pushing an ace here is something that you can increase your edge a lot if you are pushing your aces here. And as the ace deuce off is the worst ace, it's going to be even better. And we can see that the holding resources calculator is applying, when we can see that there is a really short stack, we can see that the Banhoso and Frollo would need to call only 9s plus, and I think in real life they are going to be calling wider than that. In micros, generally the players are playing with more static ranges. The higher up you go, the better the players are in adjusting their games to the situation. And in micros, people don't know that they would need to call only 2 to 3% here, and they are going to be, they know that if they call and lose, they are not getting money when it's the bubble, but they don't know that they can't call ace king. That's, I think, like ace king and ace queen, they are like magnets for some players, that they just can't ever get rid of those. And greetings to Korpisoturi. So we'll go for a bit of a wider range, and I think that's something in general, and we'll see how our best response changes. And I think this is going to be quite close what I would be shoving in this kind of situations, the micros. So this would be that I would be shoving any suited card, any queen, and like this ace isn't, I don't think it's that big of a mistake as the quick analyze says it to be, but 0.3 still, it's approximately 3% of ROI that can be gained here by shoving.
Yeah, I think one of my mistakes is that I sometimes over adjust a bit, because I sometimes experience people who call pretty crazy. As they call, once I was called, I was a mid-stake on the bubble, another guy was a mid-stake, and he called me with 10-8 suited. He put his whole tournament life to 10-8 suited. So after that, it's pretty hard to play the same spot exactly like that.
I think in general you need to make notes, and that's also something that it's good to learn to make notes when you are in the micros. Even though the players, you aren't going to see the same players all the time, but it's going to feel nice when you have written a note on a player that like calls 10-8 suited on the bubble, and then you'll adjust to him correctly, and it will feel good, and it's also going to make you money in the long run, if you learn to write good notes early on in the games. And it's not only on the tables, but when you are looking at at the hands later on. For example, I have improved a lot by looking at hand histories against opponents that I have played against that are good in my opinion. So then I have been looking that I'm looking something like 100 to 200 hands that they have played and they have shown their cards, and I'm writing notes on how they are playing, and then I'm calculating stuff out that if I'm thinking that something is not plus EV, and I'm trying to think that why does a good player think that this is a good spot to, or this is going to be profitable. And if I can't find why it's profitable, I'm then thinking about, can I write a note here and can I utilize this leak later on. But it's also going to be that you are going to learn to approach certain spots in a way that you have learned from good players in the games that are thinking a bit differently. And that's also something that if you know how to write good notes, it helps a lot with those analyses. And these are also, I think, all of these situations that we have looked through, the situations are, I think they are so clear cut. Like, even if our opponents are really bad and they are going to be calling really too wide, I still think that these are going to be profitable shoves. Mm-hmm. And the closer we are going to 0, the closer we are going to be to the point that we'll need to think about also the other players, that do we need to adjust to the other players and what do we know about other players. But in micros, I think in general you don't have a lot of hands on anyone, and it's not a huge mistake to analyze and get your readless game to be really good, because there's not a lot of hands that you can have because the player pool is so wide. Mm-hmm. And this is also an interesting hand, and this is a King 9 suited from cutoff and 5.8 big blinds. What do you think in general?
I think this is a push.
Yeah, and would this be a push if it's an offsuit King 9?
Yeah, I would say down to King 6, King 7, I think. Off would be a push.
We can see from the top right here, like King 6, King 7 would be a bit too much, but something like King 9 suited is going to be such a good hand with just five big blinds that, or 6 big blinds, especially when I think that there is antes involved, that it's something that just I think that needs to be pushed. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting, and this is also something that why the quick analyze doesn't always work like it should. In here, it's a button situation that you are 34 big blinds deep and there are 2 14 big blind stacks and you're having Jack 3 off, and in a vacuum, yeah, if our opponents would play perfectly, and this would be a profitable push. But I think in these games, it's not going to be a profitable push, and usually with 14 big blinds you are going to have better options. And as Calleon said, that we can also look at these hands in a bit of different way, that we can also look at this hand like if we are having 10 big blinds in this situation, and that's also one of a good habit when you're analyzing your hands is going to be asking questions. What about if I'm having 10 big blinds in these situations? What am I going to do? And as we can see, the optimal play if we would be effectively 10 big blinds deep would still be to shove a King 9 suited, and it's not even close. And I think this is going to be a good spot to ask that, can you see the value of this Hold'em resources is quick analyze in eliminating these kind of mistakes?
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you some homework then with the Hold'em resources calculator. But we'll see. And then as Calleon said with the King 9 suited, that it's going to be a push. Something like Jack 10 suited. I think that Jack 10 suited is one of those hands that people are underestimating the most. And it's going to be a really solid hand. And with 5 big blinds, this is going to be a situation that even if you are going to be 10 big blinds deep here, I think Jack 10 suited would be a shove.
Really? I mean, I'm the second biggest in chips here, and
if
I'm
you're
shoving
big,
in the big stick. Yeah.
I think that even if you would be a smallest stack here, I think Jack 10 suited would be a push. But we can check it.
I mean, as the smallest, I would agree, but with, I'm the second. I'm basically in second
If
place.
you are a second stack, that would it still be profitable to push Jack 10 suited here? And I think then the biggest question would be that if the big blind would be the biggest stack, because you are most worried about the biggest stack. Let's try to make an example hand out of this one. It actually doesn't matter that much. Or let's have these as the 5 BBs, or this can be somewhere around 405. So this is going to be one of the worst situations, that you are going to be second in chips, there is a close third, and the big blind is the biggest stack. And we'll see how it turns out. And we can see that we could still pretty easily push Jack 10 suited. In even this kind of situation, and it's with the biggest stack, it's, or even in this kind of situation, Jack 10 suited is going to play really well.
Okay.
That even when you get called, you are going to get called against hands that you are still going to have 40% of equity against, or more, that something like Ace King off and Ace Queen, that are not going to dominate you. And we'll go back, and this is also a suited ace. And I think this... Actually, if you are having 30 big blinds effectively, I'd open this hand anyway from the button. And if you are having only 10 big blinds effectively, and especially when the big blind is a shorter stack, I think that ace 4 suited is something that you are losing a lot of value if you are not shoving. And ace 4 off and any ace would be a shove here.
Okay.
And we can see that there are, and like, I'd like to say that the most important leaks to fix are the leaks that are big and are happening often. And here we can see, like, there are now ace and a small card that you are not shoving when you are effectively really short. And even when you are chip lead, you are not abusing the bubble as much as you could. And here is also the ace 3 suited, and when we have seen that we have looked at only few hands, and we can see that there are now 4 ace small card hands, it's something that you should really take notice about.
Okay.
And I'm trying to look at what's the time. what's the time now, and then so that we don't get lost in just hold'em resources. And I'm thinking, do we find a different kind of spot? This is bubble abuse. Bubble abuse. And this is actually something that if the big blind is active, then don't shove the 5 deuce off. But this is a spot that you can shove widely.
Mhm.
And as Caleon said, that practically any ace is always an open from button in unopened pot. And there are some bubble situations that are only ones where you should be open folding. And I think Caleon means like there are bubble situations that you know that both blinds are aggressive and you are having something like 22 big blinds, and if the blinds are going to be aggressive 3-betters, then the worst aces aren't going to be that good opens in the bubble situations, because you can't raise call or something like 15 to 16 big blinds.
Mhm.
And this is something that I don't understand. I think that this should be a misclick. In general, around these 10 big blind spots, folding pretty much any pocket pairs in unopened spot is going to be a mistake. And sixes is a really decent pocket pair.
Okay.
And this has been more of a lecture than asking you. This hold'em resources, it's not a good tool because I can't easily show the hand and ask your opinion about it. So we will be moving away from it soon. King queen off and another king queen off from button and cutoff with these kind of stack depths. I think that king queen off is also a hand that you should be opening from button pretty much on unopened pots pretty much always.
Okay.
Like in button spots in general you can open at least about 30% usually, discounting bubble spots. And in these kind of bubble spots that you are only about 10 big blinds deep effectively, you can shove them so easily. I think even if the opponents would be 20 big blinds deep, this would be a good shove, but it would also almost always be better to min raise than shove. But king queen is going to be a really solid hand to play, and that's also that when you are opening something like king queen off from the button, even if the blinds are calling, you are going to end up with a playable hand on the flop, and you are having a lot of outs to hit nicely, and it's an easy hand to play, especially when you have position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is just so much that we can see that there are hands that you have folded. I think like when I'm looking at, there are some really pretty hands and with short stack depths, and ace queen off from UTG. And this is something that I think this is from 75 to 150.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a rule of thumb, there is, if you are having an ace jack off and you are having 10 big blinds or less, it's pretty much going to be a good push.
Mm-hmm.
And even from UTG.
This is one of the spots where I use this sheet I showed you.
Yeah.
And this is a bit tighter, I think, than ace jack. So this is why that mistake happened.
And as we can see here, actually, if we are looking at the quick analyze, ace jack off is 0.01% minus in here. but ace queen off is going to be a solid shove no matter what. And something like ace 10 suited is also going to be ace 10 suited, then king jack suited, and pretty much everything from sixes up from pocket
Okay.
pairs. That's a rule of thumb, so it's not exact, but that's what I would say as a general range that you can even from UTG, and when you have antes you can go even a bit wider.
And you think it makes sense to, let's say, shove with pocket sixes and take this small edge instead of waiting for a better chance where I have more edge?
I think your edge in these games it comes from utilizing the small edges that are going to come, and with sixes it's going to be close. And in general I think that opponents in these games are, even if the opponents are going to be, I think sixes is a problematic hand because even if opponents are going to be calling a bit too wide, still sixes is going to be either it's going to be plus, and it's going to be really solid no matter what the opponents are calling you with. So that's a problematic hand that, like, even when opponents are too wide, it's still going to be a good shove, and it's going to bring a small edge anyway. But I understand your concern in trying to only take the better edge spots. And that's a valid concern, especially if the table is really good. And by really good, I mean that there are players that you can gain a lot more edge against with some other way. And it might be that I'm used to playing pretty tough games that I need to take advantage of every edge that I can find. And in these games, I think the readless strategy should still take pretty much edges, even or at least the solid edges. And I think that, and actually, if I'm thinking that I'm going to give a solid rule of thumb, then it's going to be that you should be, with 10 big blinds or less, you should be shoving unopened ace queen off, ace 10 suited, and at least eights plus. That's something that's going to always be solid, I think.
Okay.
But that's something that I don't think that your UTG play, it's not the problem. It's just that when I'm seeing ace queen here, I'm thinking that this is going to be a really good edge, and then I'm seeing also ace queen suited in a similar situation. And ace queen suited, it's going to be, I think it's going to be too good of a hand to fold in an unopened spot pretty much anyway, so I think this is an easy shove, and this is an easy shove that will net you a lot of chips. And what's even more important in sit and goes, it's going to net you a lot of equity.
Okay.
And I think that there are going to be a lot of interesting situations, but we can see that there are a lot of hands that I think that if we are thinking that opponents would play perfectly, that you could be shoving. And if we are thinking that there are some hands that we are shoving, for example, from the button or cutoff, usually if we are just opening one of these hands up, that if we are looking at these hands, we can also see that from UTG the ranges are that our opponents are getting are probably tighter than they should be. But if we are looking at it from the other way, from these button spots and situations like this, I think in these kind of situations, like the big blinds range is probably going to be wider than it's going to be in real life. So there will be some kind of adjustments. But for example, in this spot, king queen off is going to be, it's going to be a profitable shove in pretty many, and we can actually, this is also one really cool feature of Hold'em Resources Calculator, that we can look pretty quickly on that we can look at if kupus or if big blind's ranges in this hand changes when king queen off stops being a good shove. And we can take some other hands, something like, I think ace 5 off is interesting, then ace deuce suited, and then like jack 10 suited. And we can look at these hands by selecting the opponent whose range we want to see how the hands play against, selecting the plot, range versus hand equities, selecting our own name, and then we can select on maximum 20 hands. And what I said, king queen off, actually let's take something like deuces as well, and ace deuce off and ace deuce suited. And when we press OK, it calculates the plots on, and we can see here that we'll see on different kinds of hands. And there are some interesting situations in here. And can you spot one of the most interesting situations?
I think it's I have a bit of a hard time separating the colors, but I think the top line is interesting, that it never becomes bad.
And that's the king queen off.
Oh, okay.
And it doesn't matter what kind of range the big blind in this hand plays, that king queen off is always going to be a good shove. Like the wider, there is the point on somewhere around 30% of the range, but then we are getting so many hands that we are dominating or are getting at least 55 to 60% equity against, that the equity starts increasing. And the Nash ranges have been somewhere around 20% calls here. I think in general people are going to call less. And we can see that ace deuce off is going to be, I think it's going to be really close. And probably it's going to be really close to if it's a call or not. And we can see also in here that about the 20%, or actually 10 to 20% range, the hands that are so different, like king queen off, jack 10 suited, ace deuce suited, and deuces, they are almost having the same equity, but they are differing still a lot. Like deuces can be a really bad call, or really bad shove if the opponent would call any two. But I think in general, ace deuce is something that we can talk about, do we shove it or not, but any other hand we should shove. And this is something that it improves the speed on what you can think about the opponent's ranges and think about what to do with different kinds of hands pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
I think this is cool because we can see 5 different hands against ranges, and we can see how the ranges develop.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm trying to not lose the import. I think that now we have been going on for an hour, and I think that this is probably enough of the Hold'em Resources Calculator, and I have pretty much shown you the tools now that you can, I think, can plug the biggest leak in your game. And the biggest leak is that when the stacks get shorter, you are not opening up your unopened game as much as you could. And there
Okay.
are a lot of hands that you can get easy equity with if you just shove. And I think that we are going to take a break, so would we take a 5-minute or a 10-minute break? I think 5 minutes is enough. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
So we'll get back 5 past 10 and we'll carry on then. And I think that one of the biggest advantages of us with the Poker Mania is that we are having a really friendly community. So usually I'd say that in some of the poker communities, And we are back online. And Neo is still with us, and we are going to have a question at the beginning of our next hour.
Okay. Again, it's about holding resources calculator, and the question is basically when I have a specific situation, and let's say I have a high bubble factor in this situation, let's say on the bubble.
Yeah.
I learned from books that if the bubble factor is high, then a slight difference in the hand range of the opponent can have a huge impact on what I can push profitably.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how reliable it is when I work on myself, also on holding resources calculator, and I have such a spot because I think it's pretty hard to know how the opponent will react in that spot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think it's a good question. And I think that there is something that will help you with that, and one of these things was the graphing tool that we saw. And we could try to find out the hand or then craft our own hand with where we could have a nice high bubble factor. Let's craft our own hand with nice high bubble factor. This 12 big blind hand should be pretty good. Actually, there is the 8-5 off. This is a really nice hand because there's a really short stack on the cutoff, so this is going to be really nice to... Let's start crafting this to be a hand with a really high bubble factor. So for this to be the maximal bubble factor, we are going to be the third largest stack, and there is going to be a micro stack in the games. And Calleon says that interesting how streams suddenly jumped to beginning. Could you tell me a little bit more? What is the problem right now? And in here, we can look at your range here, that it's going to be the shove range that you can shove is about 20%. It's going to be really a tight range from the button, I think. So this is one of these situations that you need to be tight on the button. And we can look how the Freeman's range affects our range. And we can try this range versus player equities. This is some of the problems with the Hold'em Resources calculator, that you can do pretty much anything with it. But then there's always a question that are you smart enough to do the things you should be doing. So let's take some of those hands that are going to be affected. And Markus Y says that it's on YouTube, so press the live button. So if your stream is suddenly jumped to beginning, press the live button to get back to where we should be. And hello to Kick a Lion. And that's bad if we are getting back to beginning. But I think these are going to be pretty interesting hands, and it should be that there is going to be a really steep slope with these kind of hands when the bubble factor is high. And actually, as we can see that when we are looking at these kind of hands, we can see that all of these hands are going to start being minus EV with a pretty close range. Like the opponents, if you are looking with the crosshairs, it's something like the first hand that is, I think it's king deuce off, and it starts to become minus EV from somewhere around 5% range. And the ace deuce suited, that should be a lot better hand, starts to get minus EV from 8%. So this is what happens with the high bubble factors. And as we can see, that if the opponent calls us wide, when he has a bit of a higher stack than us, he has really an opportunity to, I don't know how to say it politely, but screw us in this kind of situation. So, and I think that there are some equity graph in Sit and Go Wizard. The graphs were nice because they were easy to use, and there were some easy range versus range views that could be really useful. And actually, I'm trying to and I think that this is your response, that if the opponent is calling less than 3%, you could shove any two. But if your opponent is calling somewhere around 8 or 10%, you could only shove somewhere around 8%. So the dip is really steep with this kind of hand that we crafted to extract the maximal bubble factor out of the hand.
Okay.
And this is also something that I'm really feeling that I'm not smart enough with this. Some of these graphs, I probably should read the manual and try to find out how it really works. But I think that that's a good question, and that's something that the books have gone on or have gotten really well. But then it's also about applying it to practice. And as we can see here, I think that most of these situations, at least I think if we are looking at just unopened hands that you have folded, I think at least the 0.2 is a pretty good cutoff. That hands that are pretty much above this cutoff are probably going to be mistakes. And I think that they are going to be pretty clear when you are looking them more closely. And there might be some hands that are just stupid because it's just a calculator. If you give it a too hard of a task, it can't calculate it properly. And like the Jack 3 off, it's plus EV in a vacuum, but this vacuum assumes that these people are going to be calling really tight. And those are some situations that you can adjust yourself. But I think that if I'm just browsing this, I think there will be something like at least 80 to 90% of these hands are going to have something interesting for you to look.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yep, that was okay.
But we'll carry on, and it's a bit of a bother because I think that with this part of the discussion, it might get a little bit boring with Hold'em resources, because you can't see any nice graphics and you can't see the hands in a nice format. It's like engineer made, and it's made for only one thing, and that's efficiency. It's not a fun tool to use, but it's an effective tool to use. And why I wanted to pick this, then I think that this is going to be the most important. Like if we would have just 1 hour with Neo, this would be the most effective way to use the 1 hour, because when we are having high blinds, then we are talking about situations that lots of chips are changing owners, and these kind of situations are where most of the money is divided in a sit and go. And in these kind of situations, there are also opportunity to either make a lot of money or also lose a lot of money. And this might now seem pretty harsh because we have only looked at mistakes, and I think that's also wrong. Like we can go it to the other way as well. Like we can see that hands that you have correctly folded, and we can see that there are a lot more hands that you have played correctly, and there is no problems with this. So this is not like you are always playing badly. This is the pretty much the opposite, that we can go pretty, if we see where the slider is right now, we can go pretty deep and we'll still be seeing a lot of plus marked hands. But this is just to have the other side, that trying to focus on the hands that are going to be most important.
Okay.
And Nigel13, hello Neil, and good that you really enjoy our videos, and hope that you are now online watching this live coaching. And I think now we can clear our filters and show the marked hand only. So I have marked a few hands that I think that we could discuss, and these are all from one sit and go. And if we are having still time left, we can go through another sit and go, or have a little bit of time if you have questions on. But we'll see that there are 8 hands about. Let's make this a bigger one, because it's always nicer. It looks like more money is moving if the windows are bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, we are having an unopened ace deuce. What do you think would be the optimal play here?
We have 5 big blinds. We are on the button, and I think we can shove here pretty wide. So the optimal way would be to shove all in.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something, and that's when we are looking at hand details. I think that we can pretty easily, and this is actually also something that I want to go through with Hold'em resources, that from this Poker Stars or Poker Tracker window, that we can just go to the view hand details, and then we can copy the hand, and on Hold'em resources we can get a basic hand, and we can paste from clipboard, and it fills all of the blinds and all of the stack sizes automatically, and that increases the speed that you can analyze your hands. And we can see that we can shove here pretty widely, and ace deuce would be a clear shove. And as we can see that you folded here, so I'd also say that there are some points of learning from the first hour.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see the next hand. We are having ace jack off, and there are 7 players on the table. We are UTG +1. What do you think about this hand?
After the first hour, I think shove.
Yeah. And
But it's...
this is also something that you have folded, and that's there's also a really good question from Kaleon. And what do you think here? And I think that if we would have 11 big blind effective stacks, what would be your line in this situation then?
If the effective stack would be 11, maybe I would play... I mean, it depends a bit on the blinds, but I would play raise fold, maybe, with 11, yeah.
I think 11, 11 big blinds, it's really tough here. And I think that against these blinds, I'd say that it would be a mistake to fold. Like, these guys are probably some of the tightest 5% of players that you'll ever encounter in the micros.
Mhm. Would you
I
shove or min raise fold?
I'd like to min raise fold if I would have something like, if this would be 50 to 100 big blinds, then I would like to raise fold here. But
Mhm.
11 big blinds, I think it's on the edge. But I think that's something that we can look pretty easily. That if we are looking at this, so it would be about 1650, and we can give them about 2000 chip stacks. And we can just first look at the shoving. I think that ace deuce would still be, it would be really close. That would it be plus EV or not? And it's on the exact bubble. Yeah, and versus these rocks it's a clear min raise fold. I probably agree, and we can also see that with the Hold'em Resources calculator we can calculate this as a 3-bet hand, and we can make the Hold'em Resources calculator to utilize different ranges, that it would give us min raise fold range, min raise call range, and also a straight shove range. And that's going to be against the optimally playing players. And we can first, because we are interested only what happens after button, we can make the previous guys fold, and that makes it a lot quicker to get through this hand. But on average, I think that min raise folding with aces is probably not, ace deuce off is probably not the optimal way. But against these nitty players, the min raise fold is most likely going to be good. And we are having a pretty interesting ranges as our default ranges here. And we are having the ace deuce off. If everybody would play perfectly, it would be in our min raise fold range. In this situation, that it's not good enough to open shove. So our open shove range would consist of medium hands, and our min raise range would consist of hands that we are going to be raise calling, like 7s plus and the highest aces. And then there is going to be min raise folds. And I think that this would be actually, this would be an interesting spot, because even when the opponents would be that aggressive, it would still be better to min raise fold the ace deuce. So I think then ace deuce would be a good min raise fold no matter what. So that's, I think min raise fold with 11 big blinds would be a good idea, even against more aggressive blinds. And practically with ace deuce, if the blinds would be more apt to just call than 3-bet, then there might be situations that you could even fold ace deuce 11 big blinds deep.
Mm-hmm.
And Kikalion, I don't think that it's a bad thing if you are agreeing with Galeon, because, and there is going to be around, with our chat, it auto updates every 15 seconds, so you can write the same stuff in 15 seconds and not see the other one's response. But that was an interesting question. And this ace jack, I think this is a clear cut shove, and that was something that got my attention. And this is probably going to be an interesting hand as well. It's a king 10 off. You are a clear chip leader in the game. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the stacks are a bit too deep to shove, right? So, I mean, I would probably make a steal raise, I think.
If you would min raise here, would you call anyone if they would shove against you?
I would call the big blind, maybe. Yeah.
I think if you are min raising here, you should always call the big blind, and that's why in this kind of situation you can't be too aggressive, because you need to call the big blind all the time, and you want to have a hand that will have decent equity against the big blind. And I think the king 10 hand is probably one of those. We can look at this hand with hold'em resources. And shoving, even when there is going to be 30.5 big blinds, I think shoving in here, it depends. I think in general what we have seen from these players, so these are all from the same sit and go, and the players aren't that aggressive that were behind you, so I think that the less aggressive the players are and more tight the players are, the more you want to be min raising and trying to avoid them when they are having the really good hands. And there comes some of the answers, and I think the answers are pretty much what I would have here and what you did have here, so that's also really good. And that's one of these situations that is about bubble abuse. I think the king 10 off is going to be a decent hand to be opening here, especially when you are having the highest stack. I think shoving is plus EV. I think that min raise folding is more plus EV, but when they are both plus EV, I wouldn't be folding here. And we can see what our hold'em resources calculator would say, and it would actually put the king 10 off to the min raise and fold to someone. I think that you would call your whole range against the big blind, so it's the same 20.8% range, and against some of these other players you are going to be folding a lot of your min raise range, but you'll see that the trend starts to emerge that ideally your min raise call range and min raise fold range is the min raise range should be pretty polarized in my opinion. So it should have the medium hands are usually have better equity if you shove them, and when you are only shoving medium hands, it's also becoming really hard for the opponents to exploit it.
This is probably a good spot for a question.
Yeah.
I noted one of my problems, I would say, is what range should I call when someone with a big stack makes a all-in re-steal or a 3-bet shove?
If we would start by utilizing these ranges as our standard ranges here, I think that if you are looking at this range, I'd actually say that if you're looking at this range, what part would you call that? We can see that there is the 13.8 big blind stack here. Let's say that we would min raise here and 13.8 big blind stack with this kind of range, and 13.8 big blind stack would reshove. What hands would you call from these hands that you see?
I would first look at his stats, maybe. Can you show me his stats again? Or is this
This is practically this is a more general question.
More general.
Yeah.
Well, it would be something like maybe eights plus and ace queen off.
And I think that that's also what you can see here, that the 8s plus, the ace queen suited, ace queen off, they are going to be the clearly the value hands. I think ace jack off could also be one of those value hands. Probably not against Hellenic. And now we can presume also that we can see from the 3-bet that an optimal range to 3-bet for Hellenic would be about 10%. I think that's more aggressive than in general, so being a bit tighter here isn't bad. But you should always think that you don't start, for example, raise folding ace queen off here, because if you are thinking about raise folding, it's probably better to shove it here.
Mm-hmm.
And as we can see, it's actually not 8s plus. Against the large stack, it would be 9s plus and ace queen suited. And we can see that they are going to be really close. Against the shorter stack, I think that the 8s and ace queen, 8s plus and ace jack off would be profitable to raise call.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is something that you can really learn about the polarized ranges by playing around with these advanced hands and using that it creates different ranges. Then we can see here that here's one raise range where the amount is only a min raise, and then there's one raise range where the amount is your whole stack.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see from this, there are hands that, for example, deuces in here, it's when there is only about 14 big blinds for the deepest player behind you, I think it would be an easy shove. When there are antes involved, the pots are going to be big, and two deuces are playing well against most call ranges. And there are, as Calleon said, that king 10 off I would tend to keep in the min raise fold range, but would prefer to shove hands like jack 10 suited, king 10 suited, small to middle pockets if small blind and button are on the aggro side. So I'd see that the ranges are shaping to be pretty much like that. And I agree that the small pockets would be best to always shove in this spot. If the players are not aggressive and they might be apt to call, then some of these hands are also good min raise hands, because you are going to see flops often and you are having decent equity and you are having position. So these kind of solid hands would be a bit different, but the general idea on how to shape your range is, I think you can get the general idea, and this is actually a great hand for that.
Okay.
Great hand for thinking about polarized ranges. And this is also an interesting one. 10-9 off. What do you think?
I think fold.
This might be something that I have noticed, that the players are pretty tight. And if they are pretty tight, I think even 10-9 off is something that you can raise, min raise, and it's also an easy raise fold. And if some opponent just calls you, it's usually an easy. But actually we can see this. This is something that I have probably taken notice, because I have seen that you are really tight in cutoff. Like my first idea when I'm seeing that there are tight players behind me, my first idea would be that this would probably be a profitable min raise fold hand. That would actually be be pretty... If the opponents are reshoving about 12 to 13%, then 10-9 off is going to be on the edge. This is one of those spots that it's something to think about, but I don't hate folding. And from the previous hands, and Nigel says that have to call button toe for the previous hand, and I think that it really depends that if you are min raising here, that when you would need to call button, and that's something that we can also look through. I hope that we have the hand still open here. Yeah, I think this is the hand still. Because we can look at Terppa's range here. And we can then use the her range versus hand equities. That's like an impossible for a Finn to pronounce. And we can see for King 10 off, actually now I'm starting to look at the wrong side of the range. There's just like, when the King 10 off is going to be profitable, and it's under 20 BBs because then Terppa would be folding so often. But we are more, now we are thinking about more when he 3-bets, what's going to be our call the 3-bet range. So even though it's Neo's name on the both sides, we need to look for the correct range. And if we are looking at this King 10 off, our opponent will need to be shoving over 22% that it's okay to call the button, even though the button has just under 11 big blinds in this situation. And I think that's something that I disagree with Nigel. I appreciate the comment, but I disagree with the idea that we would need to, in this kind of situation, that we would need to call the 10 big blind stack, especially when the 10 big blind stack has been playing really passively. If we are thinking that Terppa is reshoving here somewhere around 7 or 8% range, it's going to be, usually it's going to be, even though the other two guys would be playing pretty close perfectly, it's still going to be really plus EV if one player is too tight. And against the nit, in general, it's not a good idea to give easy chips for a nit. Like if we see a nit, it usually defines that they are having a really tight range. Are you still there?
Yeah.
But this is one of those interesting situations that we can still raise fold because of the ICM effects, even though we are really short stacked. And Calleon has a good point that when for the next hand we are now jumping between hands, that when blinds are quite call happy, it's probably best to open fold for a beginner player because there's a risk of overplaying hand post-flop. Kinds of makes a pre-flop open questionable for 10-9 off. I think that for 10-9 off it's one of those hands that it's harder to overplay. And mostly for beginners I see the mistakes that some of the players are getting in love with the aces, and people are, when they, at least most of the beginners that I have coached are having have had problems with something like ace 7 off or ace 8 off, that when they are hitting their ace, then they are pretty much going to be stacking off too light against opponents that when their range pretty much consists only of better aces, and then and with 10-9 off it's less of a hazard. With 10-9 suited, I think it would be even better. So this is a really tight spot. So I had just looked through one tournament and marked the hands that I think that will be interesting and useful to talk with Neo about. And I agree that this is probably best to open fold. So
When I
this
play these hands, I also look at how the opponent reacts to flop bets if he folds often, because there are many people who just won't fold. So I oftentimes fold my hand instead of getting into post-flop play with them.
And here it's actually nice situation that we can see that there are fold to flop bet statistics on all of these three players. We have
Yeah.
seen well five hands from Elenik and one hand from Terppa, but they have all folded to the flop bet and all the time. So
Yeah, in this spot not, but in general, I mean.
yeah.
Okay.
And I have seen that you have had some creative lines with limp stabbing a lot, and I think that in those situations there are also that you can look at how often the opponent folds their big blinds to steal anyway, and there were like opponents that are folding close to 90% for a general steal, and I think then it's almost a crime to not min raise steal from an opponent that folds about 90% to steal from something like small blind. Because if you are limp stabbing, you are still risking that the opponent hits the flop with the crappy hand or plays back at you because they perceive you as so weak there.
Okay.
And Nigel, so thanks for the comment, and that's always really good because when we are discussing and when we are talking about hands, well, that's useful, but when we are calculating what would be the most optimal line, that's even better. This seems to be an interesting hand. Well, 8-4 off. What do you think?
His big blind to steal fold is 100%, so I guess I would min raise here.
And I think that's something that we have seen this Terppa guy. I think that now that we are only having the four-handed statistics, but I think we had something like 150 hands early on from him, and he was playing somewhere around like 9% VPIP and 7% PFR, so he was playing really tight, and this is one of those spots that you can... I think that even though your hand is really bad, you can get value by min raising, and if the opponent is tight, he won't be reshoving a wide enough range. And Calleon says that not a single PT forehand reviewer misclick. And that's impossible. Yeah, the buttons, they are so confusing because there are like the forward buttons everywhere and forward all, and you can't know which one is which. And this is one of these situations that I like a min raise much more than shoving here. Even though with shove we are probably having a bit more fold equity, but it's offset that by the fact that if we are min raising here and he has a, let's say, a top 5% hand, we are only losing 400 chips. But in these kind of situations when the pot is going to be around 4,500 chips, if I'm calculating it correctly, if we are getting it in against a range that we are somewhere around having less than 2/3 equity, the opponent is winning. In chips, he's winning more here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those situations that I like. Against this kind of guy, I think that shoving is plus EV, but I think that min raise folding is more plus EV. And Kikkalion, when you would fold your bottom of your range to have higher fold equity later, I think that in the micros, the problem is that if we are thinking in the micros this kind of situation, the guys that would know how to correctly adjust to this kind of situation, they are probably playing more tables and they are not that likely to see the situations. And those players that see the situations probably don't know what's the correct way to adjust in this kind of situation. Like if they see one, you raise fold one time and then they are seeing a bit later on that you are raising, and you are raising with a polarized range. This time you are having ace queen suited. They might give you a really good, even though if you have raised folded a lot of the time, but then people just are remembering that most likely the hands that you are having against them, and then they are going to, even then they are going to remember more of those hands that they are getting it in really bad. And as Kaleon says that most villains tend to be adjusting very little in these games, I would assume. And I think also that the players are more likely to play mostly his own cards, and then you can exploit your opponents a lot. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And we win the pot anyway. So no harm done by shoving, but we are not results oriented, so we are trying to find the highest equity play in every situation. And this would be another situation with the queen 3 suited. What
I
do you
would say
think?
min raise. I would do a min raise
Yeah.
fold.
Against both of these opponents.
Yeah.
And this is one of the situations that you have actually. I need to change for the database. Now I have your database here. So we are back, and could you please tell me when you can see me again? And so this is a hands report, and we are carrying on with the hands, and the last hand I think was the queen 3 suited.
Correct.
And let's start the replayer from there. Nope, not that replayer. And let's start the replayer. And it works now. That's good. I had to reboot. And so we'll first probably we want to see if it's plus EV to shove this deep, the queen 3 suited. And would there be a better option? So what we'll do is we'll want to copy the hand history. let's get to the Hold'em resources calculator and let's get it cracking. And actually, as we can see that if the opponents are playing correctly, we could shove any two here. And I think that this is probably the most loose player here. And if he would call a bit too wide, even then Queen 3 suited is going to be probably solid enough. Solid enough to shove, but I think that min-raise fold is mostly going to be better. And we can look it with additionally allow shove. And cutoff folds, so we are on the button. So this is also one of those hands that shoving is not a mistake, but I think that there is a better option. And actually, it's a really interesting hand if we are looking that everybody would play perfectly. And this actually highlights it even better when we are having an any two range. This highlights the polarized ranges even more, because I think it's pretty easy to see which hands are raise call hands and which hands are raise fold hands in this range. I think this is one of these situations that even though Hold'em resources, when it thinks that everyone plays perfectly, and it always has a perfect knowledge of everyone's ranges so that it knows to calculate the optimal response. And that's why when we are min-raising, it increases the ranges a lot compared to straight shoves. And if the range is not increased by that much, then I think that there will be and let's do the best response. If we are removing 7% of his hands, then we are not shoving anything, but then we are min-raise, just min-raising everything. This is also a bit of an interesting situation. That it's like 5% of range change and then it moves it to a completely opposite direction. But this is one of those situations that I would probably min-raise fold, especially against really tight players. Even though they might be a bit call happy, because then we are still playing in position and we are going to get more than our fair share of pots post flop as well if they call.
Okay.
Do you agree with me, or?
The only thing is the short stack. Maybe I shoved because I thought that he might wake up and 3-bet me, or because he has to do something. So maybe that was the reason why I shoved, because I didn't want that he would play back at me.
Yeah. Well, that's a point. It's also, I think it depends more on the player, and might be that you are having more hands on the player than we do, because I have only, I think, one session or a few days of your games, so so I don't have that many games on you. And we are actually carrying on. We are pretty much the exactly same situation, but now we are with nines. What would you do here?
I think the easiest thing would be to shove, I think, because nines are pretty good, but I think they lose a bit of value if I go post flop with them. So I guess I would shove.
I think this is an interesting situation in the matter that now you would more welcome shoving here. That shoving, you would, nines is actually on the edge of would you want to induce a shove, especially from Hellenic. But for Terppa you would like to induce a shove here. And the real question is how much wider his 3-bet shove range is compared to the call shove range. Actually, that's a good point. But even in here, it's like 3-bet shove range is still 3 times wider than the big blind's just call shove range. So even with against a 3 times wider range to reshove than just call shove, it would move most of the hands out of the and XXIXX asks an interesting question on the Queen 3 suited hand. That if we get called, do we raise any board versus those folds on flops or check fold Ace XX / King XX boards? And I think that in general, if we are getting to post flop, we are going to play quite honestly but with a twist. That if our opponents donk, we are not going to be hero calling. Because in micros, when the opponents donk, it usually means that they have hit something. Especially if they are loose opponents that haven't bet a lot post flop. But if it comes check to us, I think that we are going to bet always. With the Queen 3. I think the only exceptions to the always bet would be Ace King and King Queen type of boards. That we are having a lot of equity, but we are probably not getting called by worse and we can value own ourselves pretty easily. What do you think if this would go post flop?
Since I'm the pre-flop aggressor, I think I would continue on any board.
Yeah.
If he checks to me, yeah.
Yeah. If it gets checked to you, it's pretty much you are printing money if you are c-betting, because in general people are folding a lot after they check. And that's one of the nice perks of having position.
Maybe it's also because I have a bigger stack that, I mean, he should have more to lose than I have to lose in this situation. So I think I can be aggressive post flop, even on a bad board, because I think he will think twice before he would make a move. I mean, he has to have really a solid hand on that board.
I think that's a really, really good additional point. So, and that's really good thinking that when you are having a larger stack, if your opponent thinks about their situation, they wouldn't want to fight against the biggest stack on the table. And they should be most inclined to fold against the biggest stack of the table. And this nines is practically, it's more of a, probably it gets more to a general question because at first it's in my head it was like this is pretty clear cut a min raise call.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would really be afraid if they just call my min raise. Because, I mean, then I would say, oh god, why didn't I shove it?
Yeah, it's practically it's a bit different. Like if they just call, I think you are getting the pot post flop pretty often. And with nines you are having decent equity on most boards. And then there are some horrible boards like ace high or king high boards.
Mm-hmm.
But against Terppa it's even a bit more nasty if you are min raising and he's just calling because you are left by just one, or you have just one pot left, and then you need to do light call downs. I don't think that you can fold There are really rare boards, and I think that the board should have 2 overcards to fold. And as Calleon says that there are also nasty situations, and now it's pretty hard to imagine because we are talking about the speculative situations that if in this queen 3 hand, if we are getting to a flop and let's say that we are flopping something like 5-7 king flop, or let's say 5-7 jack, and our opponent donk bet small, it will feel so weak to fold if we are having complete air. But if we are raising, we are going to get called so often. And as Calleon said that he doesn't mind to shove against a call happy BB. Yeah, nines is going to be a good shove against a call happy BB. If the opponent is mostly just calling and doing the calling too much, then it's good. With King Queen, we are revisiting the same exact situation practically. Actually, Terppa stack has dwindled a bit, but what would you do here with King Queen off?
I guess I would do a min raise, and I think I would call his shove. Also the shove of the small blind.
And what would you do against the big blind?
Fold if he plays back.
Yeah. And I think in this situation, if we are comparing nines against King Queen, I think with the King Queen the King Queen plays worse as a shove against the tight calling range. And also you are post flop, you are probably having easier time with King Queen off than with nines. But this was a spot that kept on giving because we got the 3 different hands from pretty much the same spot. And now we are pretty much at the end, and we have had about 15 minutes of pauses due to some technical problems. And this is actually also the final hand that I was looking, and now I think there would be a really good time for some questions, because I thought that you would have some.
Me? Oh, yeah, let's see.
It's also a really good time if someone else is having questions as well.
One question I have is, what do I do when there are high blind limpers, specifically on the bubble?
High blind limpers on the bubble. That's a pretty wide question on what to do with high blind limpers, because that would also mean that we would have a. Actually, I think this is a question that's more easily answered by some example hands, so we could try to find some of the example hands. So let's do actions and opportunities. Pre-flop calls. Let's try to find out the hand where there would be limpers when the blinds are really high near the bubble, because it really depends. There are, for example, if someone limps from the small blind, it's usually you can be shoving against them and they are folding a lot in general, but also you should keep your notebook open and make a note if the opponent limps, and when he limps and he calls you twice with something like aces, then you know that he's up to no good when he's limping. But usually I play pretty aggressively against high blind limpers, but I need to have a stack that I'll have fold equity, so if I have a high blind limper, we would still need to be effectively at least 8 big blinds deep, at least, so that I would have a decent fold equity, and then I could play more aggressively. And less than 8 big blinds, I would always need to have a value hand, because I think that the limper would pretty much always be calling.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-flop
Okay.
opportunities. Opportunity to raise limpers. This is what we are wanting, what we want to see. Opportunity to raise limpers, and let's get to high blinds. I think high blind limpers, it's somewhere from 150 from 300 chips. I think those are going to be pretty much the high blind limpers. And Kaleon again has a really good point that when playing versus limpers, it's usually better to aim against a player who is also having a raising range. For example, Kaleon raises 25/10 limper more preferably than some limper which would be 20/4 when our raise size is shove. And I think with what you talked about the high blind limpers, you are meaning about limpers when the blinds are high and the stack sizes are pretty short.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Kaleon's point is actually really good when we are thinking from, let's have like 25/10 and then we'll have 19/4. Both of the players are having 15% limp range. But the 19/4 guy is having way better hands in his limping range, and the guy that raises 10%, he's most likely raising all of the good hands, and when he limps he's only left with some traps, but most of his limping range is going to be pretty crappy.
Mm-hmm.
And game details actually. So we are tournament blinds and antes, and big blinds greater or equal than 250. And let's put this to the filter. Save and apply filters. We had no marked hands for high blind limpers. And we are having just 61 hands. So I think that what we can see here is also that why filtering hands is good. You sent me about 10,000 hands in total. And 0.6% of those hands had high blind limpers that had acted before we did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty rare situation to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the first hand is probably going to be pretty interesting with the ace-4 suited, because it's going to be pretty close that if it's a hand that should be a value hand. Let's get this a bit larger. This is actually a bit more interesting when you are having the opponent that limps here.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to be the biggest stack. And we don't have a lot of hands on him. That's pretty much the theme for the day. And it's also that this day has been more than it has been from adjusting to different players. This night has been more on getting your readless play to be in a way better level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, when we are having only a few hands, it's conductive of that. And when we can see that the player is raising 83% of the small blinds, maybe that this is the first hand that he plays from small blind from 3 to 4 players. But in these kind of situations, when a player that plays 83% of the small blinds as a raise, I would actually also be checking here, because I'm thinking that if I have like 5 hands on the opponent and he has raised all the previous hands and now he limps, I'm thinking that this will be a trap really often. And if the opponent is checking, I would probably with ace high I'm going to be betting here. And I'm thinking that the min bet would be enough, the 400 chips here, if the opponent checks. And I don't hate check back, because you are having a lot of good cards on the turn. Any ace, any three, any club, I think. They are all going to be good cards. And ace X would be, as default, it would be a shove. Let's say there is a player that has open like 50% of the small blinds, it would be an easy default shove. And Kikal, I am curious why he doesn't raise this time. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. And if our opponent checks twice, what do you think about it?
Well, usually it means that he doesn't have something, or it could mean that he's still waiting for me to make a move to put money in the pot. I think it's more the first, but it depends a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carry on.
I noticed some players who have like a really strong card and they just check and they maybe at the river they bet something.
I think that in general, if players are having a really strong hand to this flop and the turn doesn't change anything, I'm thinking that most of the players with the like really strong kings here would be on the turn starting to bet, because there's still a lot of money to get in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So at least on the turn, I think you should be betting. And Kaleon said that sample size is quite small to put enough trap reads for me. That's also true, but if there has been 6 opportunities to steal and he has been active on every single time, and that's actually really interesting to see that. And I think whatever we see here, it's going to be noteworthy. And I think that we can still get some of the hands that actually our opponent shouldn't have any hands that would be ahead of us. So actually Kaleon has a point in that no need to turn ace-4 into a bluff. I'm just thinking that on the turn we are going to get the pot so often that... But I'd say that on the flop I would bet pretty much. And on the river we are checking behind, and whatever we see here, I think we should make a note. And when we see 3-7 suited, we practically know that if our opponent has raised from small blind or has stolen from small blind 5 out of 6 opportunities and limped once, and once that he limps he shows 7-3 suited, we can be playing so aggressively on his small blind limps. Like we can be playing really, really, really aggressively. And this is a note that will make you money. A note when you are combining it to the statistics you would have.
Okay.
That if an opponent is a really aggressive raiser from small blind, and when you have seen him play a hand, you have seen him play a 3-7 suited. And as Kalehan said that he was snap calling Shavon pre-flop. And actually there probably would be room for at least one more question.
I mean, the good thing is that you answered a lot of them that I noted in the video. I think I have one question. It's a bit abstract.
Okay.
It's about coin flips. I often notice situations where a coin flip occurs, and I'm often asking myself if I could have avoided it, or if the other player should have avoided it. So, yep. I mean, as an example, maybe, for example, if we are in early game, and let's say someone raises, and I 3-bet him, and I have ace king off, and or no, the other way around. I raise, I get 3-betted, and I have ace king, and I go all in this situation. I mean, I don't do that now, but in the past I did that, and there are people, even good players, who have no problem calling with pocket eights or ace queen or something like that. I mean, shouldn't they fold these hands?
Actually,
I mean, I would fold them, but they don't.
Actually, that would be like eights would be an easy fold in that kind of situation. But usually, in those kind of situations, what we should do is with poker, I think one of the hardest spots would always be to think productively.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't matter, like, if we are getting an ace king against eights coin flip, it doesn't matter in general, and if we are losing the ace king against eights coin flip and we are feeling bad, and we are thinking that our opponent is stupid and he should avoid the coin flip.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unproductive.
Mm-hmm.
The productive way would be if our opponent is calling eights, is my play with ace king optimal against this kind of opponent? Like how I would be playing my range in this kind of situation, like is he going to be calling like ace queen? That would make the ace king a whole lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Better call if he's calling like eights, is he also calling ace queen? And that's also something that you can calculate then, like calculate and be correct that you know your ranges and you know that something is plus EV. It helps your mental side of the game. And also, like always thinking productively, like if your opponent is making a mistake, you shouldn't be thinking that your opponent is stupid and he shouldn't be doing that. You should be happy that your opponent is doing that, because when he's doing that kind of thing, he's having a leak. And when he's bad and he's having a leak, always a good player can adjust and can take advantage of the leak. And even if you think that like an opponent would have a leak that he would get himself all in with eights on a lot of occasions, and you are thinking like, what can I do with the ace king? That's also unproductive, but then you can be happy when you get to a table where the opponent is, because it's quite likely that with 20 hands he's going to have a middle pair and he's going to get all in, like let's say in 1 in 5 tournaments. And when he's coin flipping against someone else than you are gaining money from the other player's mistake, even when you are not in the hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's one of the greatest points in sit and goes in poker, is how to do productive thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Kickalion with all in with ace king in early blind levels is probably bad. I would rather take a flop. I think it depends with the all-in with ace king, and it depends a lot of positions and reads. And in my games, it's not that rare for me to open ace king off early and fold to a 3-bet out of position. And also Marcus Y says that that's one of those spots that making notes is important, and I wholeheartedly agree. And also it it depends, like if you are facing an under the gun open, and if you are then 3-betting ace king off from a late position, then you should also be thinking that are you playing the hand optimally, because you could also play the ace king in position, and the UTG pretty likely has a tight range. But the situation can turn on its head, like if there is a cutoff open and you're on the small blind, and then when you are 3-betting, then the opponent can also look that when you are 3-betting, if you are having something like, let's say 25 big blinds and you are 3-betting, let's say 30 big blinds effectively, opponent opens from cutoff, you 3-bet, then the opponent's 4-bet range can easily include a lot of weaker hands than ace king, and then it's okay to get it all in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was a very good question, and I think that we are pretty ready to end. But I think that I'll give you some homework assignment.
Okay.
And I think that you should try the Hold'em Resources 2 weeks trial. Then go through the filter for the unopened folded hands that I showed you early on the first hour, and look through them with the quick analyze function, and try to take for example the last week's hands and look at the, let's say that you look at something like 5 to 10 hands, and if you are having a 2 weeks trial, I'd say that do it twice a week, and mark somewhere, like start a forum thread or something, and mark how much or how big of a mistakes you have on the first time, the second time, the third time, and the fourth time. And the aim isn't to get all of the mistakes gone, but the aim is to get rid of the worst mistakes.
Okay.
But that's something that you can improve your game by just, I'd say it takes something like half an hour at a time. And it's a way to improve your game. And also, if you are having 2 weeks of Hold'em Resources, you should also be looking at hands on any time, but those quick analyses, let's say at least 4 times the quick analysis, that would be probably something that would be really useful for you in the journey of ditching the really tight charts and trying to learn to understand the situation. And if you are finding a hand that you don't understand and why it's a shove, or why it's a shove, I think that you should try to post it to the hand analysis forums, and we'll try to think about why the Hold'em Resources would give it as a shove, and what would the true ranges be in that kind of situations.
Okay.
But I think I'd say that thank you. I think this has been a good session, and I think this session has had a lot of teaching value for someone that has started to learn charts and play really tight sit and go poker, and is thinking about how to get to the next level and how to improve further from the charts. I think there is a lot of material to start the first steps to improve.
Yeah, thank you. It was really good.
Yeah, and to our users, thanks for everyone that did chat, because when you are chatting, it also gives even more value for the guy that's being public private coach, because there are more ideas, and there has been really good comments from Caleon, Kikalayan, Nigel, Marcus Y. So really good comments from you guys, and yeah, for the Finnish guys, tomorrow we are going to have MTT public private coaching in Finnish with member PS 2011, and that might be interesting for the MTT players. And for the next week, I don't think that we have time for English coachings, because I'm going to Finland, and I'm going to be in some cottages and places without internet, so can't coach in 2 or 3 weeks. Actually, at least 2 weeks. But there will be Pot Limit Omaha with Kyberi, and there will be No Limit Hold'em cash games with Janfes at least. And those are going to be the next week's program for the English side. And if you are going to sleep, have a good night, and if you are carrying on playing poker, may this be the winningest night of them all. Thanks for listening. See you next time in about 3 weeks.